Good morning, all. I'm going to wait just another few seconds before we get started. And I'll look to our court reporter, who I believe is online.
Yes,
Are you ready for us to
I
go on the record?
am. I,
Great.
I I am whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, I'll get started with our introductions. Good morning. It is February 21st, 2025. I'm Nicole Kinsey, presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water right application 25517X01 and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, the unassigned portion of 25517, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. Today is the first day of the rebuttal portion of the hearing. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom teleconference and is being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. The audio and video are being recorded. We will post those files per our usual practice in the FTP folder for this proceeding, and you can also find the YouTube recording on the YouTube webpage. If you are experiencing technical difficulties today, please send us an email. The AHO inbox is fine, or sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov. Once again, Ms. Mullen will be handling the screen sharing of exhibits and moving along of slides for the witnesses who are presenting. So if you are a witness, you may simply ask Ms. Mullen to advance your slides when you're ready. And attorneys and other representatives, you're welcome to ask Ms. Mullen directly to bring up particular exhibits during cross-examination. Per our usual practice, we will take breaks today. We will take a lunch break. We're going to talk about scheduling in a moment, but we may be taking a more abbreviated lunch break to make sure we can get through this rebuttal in the scheduled hearing days, so we can talk about that. For now, I will continue to hold the hearing to a hard stop at 5 p.m. That's something we may also want to talk about if we are under time pressure. It may be that we want to start these hearings a half hour earlier or possibly extend them a half hour, but we won't do that without warning. I know all of you have commitments and other things, so I will try to be very clear about that. Today, we will have a hard stop at 5. My intent is not to call for appearances. We last met February 6th. I know it's been a little while, although it seems like just yesterday. But I will look to the room. Is there anyone who, any representatives here who did not have a chance to introduce themselves when we last met February 6th or when we were together on February 3rd? If you would, please feel free to either raise your Zoom hand or unmute your microphone and introduce yourself. All right, I think we have the same, our usual team here. Before we jump into orienting us today, I did want to thank Mr. Stork, who sent an email to the AHO informing us that it had come to his attention that Mr. Patrick Porgans, who was a party to this proceeding, unfortunately passed away late last year. He was a party in this proceeding, and I think because of his health was unable to participate as much as I think he would have liked. He was also a participant in many of the other proceedings before the State Water Board, and I had interacted with him in that capacity as well. And it's my understanding of Mr. Porgan's career that one of his purposes of the work he did and the involvement he had in these proceedings was to remind the board and the other government agencies to act within the rule of law and in the best interest of the people. So I wanted to make a note on the record this morning about those principles to continue to remind us and this board and our decision-making process in memory of Mr. Porgans, who I'm sure would have liked to be here to remind us himself. With that, I will jump in to where we are. We most recently, on February 3rd and 6th, heard testimony from the authorities' witnesses about the incidental take permit, and we are picking up today with rebuttal, as I mentioned. a few housekeeping items before we get to our witnesses. One, I set time limits for rebuttal. It's the same chess clock approach we have been doing in my email of February 11th. So I hope you saw that. If you haven't, I refer you to it. That's laid out there. Um, I know, Mr. King, you had made a request about time. You'd indicated that Mr. Ornbaum is not planning to participate. Um, and you had asked to take Mr. Ornbaum's time. At this time, I'm going to deny that. I think I had granted 2 hours to you. I granted 2 hours to the United States. It seems like I think that's an appropriate allocation of time. Once again, as we did with case in chief, if you get to the end of your time, we can talk about how, and you have additional questions, we can talk about how to move forward. But at this time, I'm going to limit, and especially because we're pressed to get through these proceedings within the days we have scheduled, I'm not going to grant that request at this time. We also need to talk about rebuttal dates. I had indicated in my email that I thought we needed 4 more days. I'm not sure we do. Now that I've gone through the testimony with more care, it's not as lengthy as I think I initially thought. I think we probably could do it in 2. 4 would have been safe. We probably do it in 2. I had suggested dates at the end of April, and that seemed to be generally disliked by all sides. So here's what we're going to do. And I understand that it does make some sense to complete the rebuttal as one block and not take a 6-week break. I had initially scheduled the afternoons of March 4th and 5th, and the reason was for that week, and that was all. The reason is I have limited availability on that week. I would like to put on calendar full days on March 4th, 5th, and 6th. That will effectively add 2 days to our rebuttal time. And I'm going to appoint one of the other hearing officers to conduct the proceeding on those days because I am not available. I think with that addition, we will not have to start early and late or cut our lunch breaks down too much. But it is my intent to try to proceed as efficiently as possible, and I ask each of you to proceed as efficiently as possible, noting that these are, of course, very important topics, and it, I will certainly, as we move through cross, if we run up against time constraints and we're making it's productive, I will certainly take that into consideration. From there, I was going to go, I have a couple more things about order of witnesses and an exhibit item, but I'm going to take a pause. Are there any comments, questions, etc., before we proceed? Mr. King.
Yes, thank you. So my question really relates to panel 2, and I've been focused on the submitting my water rights. I've had health issues, but also focused on submitting the water rights evidence, and so I just really started focusing on Mrs. Forsythe's written testimony. And she makes references to prior oral testimony, and then also makes reference to testimony on October 10th. I'm not sure what oral testimony she's talking about, because you eliminated like 99% of my oral testimony. And there's her references in October 10th. I believe it's part of the part that you eliminated from evidence. So I would ask you to look at that. Also, I have not been through litigation proceeding forward. I don't, understand really totally the scope of rebuttal, but she makes references to some statements by 2 witnesses, Mr. Spessert and Mr. Robinette. Is that appropriate to actually bring them in with statements they made? I think I'm not even sure if they made them within this proceedings. I guess the question is, were they in the proceedings or not? But it seems that I should be able to have a direct rebuttal to those 2 witnesses. But I'm as I look through this, I'm not sure what oral testimony she's talking about, but also I'm not sure what part of my oral testimony is actually in evidence.
So it sounds like, thank you, Mr. King. It sounds like we have two issues here. One is, and I think Ms. Forsyth referenced that there's some lack of clarity as to what testimony of yours was stricken from the record. I don't think we went back and clarified that. So that may be on my to-do list to, yes. So I see in Ms. Forsyth's testimony, which is cites 410, footnote 1, Ms. Forsyth references that the stricken testimony, but the lack of clarity in the record as to what was remained. And so
Yes.
the authority can speak for themselves, but I'm operating under the assumption that this was a just in case kind of rebuttal response. So I think a to-do list for me is to, and I probably won't get to this before we get to Ms. Forsyth's testimony because that I anticipate will be today. But a to-do list for me is to clarify what of your testimony was stricken from the record. And I think maybe the way to do this will be, well, let me look to the authority. Do you have any further comment on where we are with that?
Yes, Hearing Officer Kenzie, this is Michelle Chester on behalf of the authority. You are correct that rebuttal was included with the footnote specifically because we understood the portions of written testimony that were stricken, but less so related to the oral testimony. If your decision is that Mr. King's oral testimony was not admitted, we would not object to striking those sections from Ms. Forsyth's rebuttal testimony.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Let me, if it's possible, maybe I can do this on a break, depending on how things go. But maybe this is something that let's see how we handle it as we get to that. Although like I said, we'll get to that very quickly, I think, today. So thank you. And then Mr. King, you had other questions about oral testimony referenced by Ms. Forsyth and where that came from. I think probably the best way to handle that is to ask her yourself, and then we can work through it. My understanding from my read was that she was referencing testimony previously submitted in this proceeding, but I will not speak to that on behalf of Ms. Forsyth. So let's
just from a point of efficiency, could we move her panel to Monday morning, panel 2? Which I believe that's, her testimony is going to be in panel 2, because I really don't know what I should focus on and what I shouldn't focus on. And you've given me 2 hours to understand it's the same amount as the United States of America, but the United States of America never actually made a case in chief. And so if you're going to limit me to 2 hours, I'd like to be as efficient as possible. And I'd like to know what exactly I need to what I need to respond to.
Understood. I'm not going to change the order of the panels because I think the other parties are relying on this order at this point, and probably the authority is relying on this ordering of witnesses and have them prepared today. But it may warrant a bit of a longer break if I can clear this up in advance of hearing from Ms. Forsyth. So that's so noted, and I understand your concern, and maybe we can address this quickly in the beginning. I think Ms. Forsyth can probably speak to it without the need for cross, and we can just clarify this once we get her here on the stand and testifying. So we will proceed, but your concern about the lack of focus is noted, and that makes sense to me. We will see if we can get this sorted out.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, I believe, so we have an order of witnesses from the authority, of course, which they circulated. I wanted to look to the coordinating NGO parties. I don't believe, I looked back again this morning. It's my understanding that I don't have an order of rebuttal witnesses yet from you, and I'm wondering if you have that and when you can circulate that to all of us.
Yeah, so excuse me. We have, in an ideal world, figured out, I think, what that order looks like, and now we're trying to mash that ideal world into schedules. And
which I just changed. I realized
which exactly. Well, and I mean, which we candidly expected were going to change, whether that was additional dates as you had proposed them, or different additional dates, or now what you've suggested this morning. so we need to make sure that our witnesses can be available that week of March 4th on those 2 half days that were not previously scheduled and on
The
the
6th.
additional date on the 6th.
Yep.
Once we know that that works, we ought to be able to plot out what the schedule or the order looks like and share that with the parties substantially in advance of, well in advance of when those people would testify, I think. We had been working under the tentative assumption that between the site's witnesses and the DWR and state water contractor witnesses, we would not begin our case in chief until what were those 2 half days in March at the earliest. So we need to coordinate with the 8 or 9 folks on our end to make sure that their schedules work within those confines. And then we can share a proposed order, at least for who those first few witnesses will be, I would expect next week sometime.
Let's aim, thank you, that's very helpful. If we can, let's see, March 4th is a Wednesday, right? No, Tuesday. So if you
Tuesday.
can aim for the end of the day on Tuesday to have a tentative list of next week. Noting that, it's not, we're not carving it in stone, but it would be helpful to have a proposal. Let's do that. So end of the day, whatever that, flipping to through my calendar here. Let's see. End of the day on the 25th.
We will do our best.
We will also know a little more once we get through today and Monday. Hopefully we'll have a little more clarity about how quickly we're moving along. So I realize that affects availability too. So the last, go ahead.
I apologize. One other just, I suppose mostly practical consideration. In terms of assigning a different hearing officer to conduct the hearing for those 3 days, I don't mean to cast aspersions on any of your colleagues, some of whom I have appeared before and I think would do a fine job, but we've been 30 odd days together as this group before you. How does that work in terms of the evidence received or anything else? Just from a practical standpoint in the decision-making process here, because just makes me a little bit nervous to switch hearing officers temporarily halfway through.
I mean, my understanding, and that's fair enough, but it's the hearing officer assigned would be for the purpose of conducting the hearing for those 3 days and for ruling on evidentiary objections, especially on cross and things as they arise during that proceeding and carrying us forward. My intent would be to review the transcript for those proceedings and fully be aware of the testimony and review the testimony that occurs during those proceedings. It's just that I'm not physically available during those 3 days. So it would be, it's not as if no decision-making role would change other than the evidentiary rulings that necessarily occur on the fly during those 3 days. And I would make a commitment. I don't think I can make a commitment to watch in real time 3 days worth of hearings, but I certainly can I certainly will review the transcript, and I very likely will review video of key elements that might occur on those days. So that's my intent. And you can think and process that further.
No, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's my intent. And I appreciate I enjoy spending time with you too. So I'm sorry I can't be there for 3 days in March. I had a question for, and I guess the same request of the South Delta parties, although I think your rebuttal will come after the coordinating NGO witnesses. So at some point in advance, it would be helpful to get a proposed order of witnesses, although I don't think you had as many. I don't recall off the top of my head.
I will get you one as soon as possible, or by when did Mr. Busher commit to it?
He didn't actually commit. I think I directed him for the 25th and he said he'd try.
I
So
will do the same.
thank you. Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I just wanted to make a note about our order of witnesses. We did have one change that we know we need to make at this point, which is to switch panels 5 and 6. I don't think that really affects the other protestants on this because they'd be a few days out, but Ms. Hale and Ms. Weber have availability issues next week. And if we do otherwise get to through panel 6 by the 26th, or maybe it's late Tuesday next week or late Wednesday. We have talked with the state water contractors and DWR, and they could put their witnesses on so that we don't have any gap in the hearing time, and then we could start with our panel 5 then on March 4th. So I wanted to raise that issue. We weren't aware of the availability problems. And we may very well get through our panel 6 by, next Tuesday, maybe early Wednesday. And so we did try to coordinate with state water contractors and DWR. They each have one witness for their rebuttal cases.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I think, of course, we'll know a little more at the end of the day today about how quickly we're moving. But that's helpful and that makes sense to me. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just clarify, Mr. Hitchings, the panel 5 can't testify next week? Is that the takeaway here?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they don't, I mean, they're not going to happen today. So that's going to have to be the following week in March. At least that one rebuttal panel from your perspective. Okay, thank you.
That's correct. And yeah, and so we would flip-flop, go through 6. There's 3 witnesses on panel 6. So it may be that will get us to March 4th anyway, but if not, then the state water contractors and DWR could use that time on Wednesday.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I have no objection to that order. That's fine with me.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Mertz.
Thank you, and good morning, Ms. Kinsey. I thought I heard we added the 6th as a date. Did I mishear that?
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will put this in writing in an amended hearing notice so that we all have it, but that is correct. We are adding March 6th as a date and then adding full days to the 4th and 5th. Mr. Soderlund.
Gotta go with the potential scheduling. Aaron Miller is available next Wednesday, but only in the morning. And if we kind of start a little bit earlier, maybe go into lunchtime, I was just wanted to kind of put it out there that if it does work out timing wise, just to see if the other parties thought that they could conduct their cross-examination within that 3.5 hours next Wednesday morning.
So the question here is, so you're aiming to have Aaron Miller in the morning on February on Wednesday. What is that?
It's 6th.
February
26th.
Thank you. And the question is whether we can get through cross in the morning. I'm not sure. Well, I'll look to the coordinating NGO parties. I'm not sure at this point you have estimates. Well, maybe you have estimates for length of cross. Do you have a sense of how much time you would spend to cross-examine?
So,
Mr. Miller?
I think, and if I've got the witnesses backwards, I apologize. But I think that is mostly a question for Mr. Ruiz or Ms. Meserve.
Okay.
He's rebutting their testimony, so we had intended to allow them to do the cross-examination first among the protesting parties. We may have some limited follow-up questions after Mr. Ruiz or Ms. Meserve are done, but I would expect our role in Mr. Miller's cross-examination to be fairly limited.
Thank you. That makes sense now that I think about it. Mr. Ruiz, do you have or Ms. Meserve, do you have an estimate of cross-examination time?
For probably, I would say 20 to 30 minutes.
All right, great, thank you. So, Mr. Soderlund, it sounds like we will aim to have Mr. Miller in the morning of the morning of March 4th, barring some, I don't know, other reordering of the schedule, but noted that your witness is not available in the afternoon, but it sounds like we can get through cross and everything in the morning. So we'll try to do that.
That's great.
Kenzie,
Thank
can
you.
you clarify the date again?
Yeah, is that Wednesday,
Sorry.
March 26th?
February.
February 26th. I think I said that.
February.
February
Yeah, I'm
26th.
all over the place now.
Mhm.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
I had one housekeeping question for Save California Salmon. We received your rebuttal exhibits, and it looks like we now have two exhibits labeled SCS 11, and they're for different witnesses' testimony. So I just we were going to renumber that exhibit. It looks like the rebuttal exhibit is rebuttal testimony of Lester Marston. So what we had intended to do was to change that from SCS 11, which we already have, and make that SCS 91. But I wanted to make sure, I wanted to let you know and also make sure I wasn't confusing anything. Do we have a representative from Save California Salmon?
We don't, it doesn't look like. Ms. Mertz and I can report to them and note that. And I suspect if there are any follow-up questions from them, they can either join or pass those back to us today.
Great, thank you. We'll plan to do that unless there's, like I said, I just want to make sure we're not confusing things further by doing this, but I wanted to eliminate the dual exhibit numbering.
And
I
I'm
will
sorry,
turn
you
to-
said 91?
Yes, so what came in as rebuttal SCS 11 will now be SCS 91, which is the next number, according to our records, was the next unavailable number in the numbering of SCS exhibits.
Great.
That's all on my list, so now I will turn to the room to see what other housekeeping we have. Mr. King.
Yes, thank you. So I have a conflict on Monday afternoon, beginning of the afternoon, and then on the 25th, I believe. Is that right? No, it's the 24th. 24th, the afternoon of the 24th, and then on the 26th, I have to be in Fresno early in midday morning, so I'm not sure about my participation. I'm not sure if it's going to matter, but I just want to raise those issues right now for your scheduling.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Soderlund.
Yes, thank you. We realized that DWR did not provide a summary of Aaron Miller's testimony. If you've read it, it's very simple. I don't even think it's necessary to have a PowerPoint up, but just to give people something to look at, talking points, whatever. We could provide that, but I don't want to cause any issues or be unfair. So I just wanted to put it to you as far as whether you think it'd be appropriate for us to send over.
I don't think that, thank you, Mr. Soderlund. I don't think a summary is necessary. And it sounds like in this case, it's not. So it would be fine for the witness to proceed without anything just to testify. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Schutz.
Yes, we've had an issue with one of the exhibits that site submitted for the ITP. I didn't think it was going to be a problem in practice, but it turns out that it is. Sites 335 is a spreadsheet tool, and when we take it out of safe mode and enable editing, part of the data shows what's called a name error in Excel. And so we're not able to change the inputs and and do different things with the tool. I asked Mr. Reese to review it. He had the same problem. I asked a colleague, a hydraulic engineer with one of the agencies to review it. That person had the same problem. And we'd like to request that first, the sites authority check and make sure that they're able to run the tool appropriately as it was submitted. And in case that there's something on our end that we don't know about, an add-in or something that sites engineers are using to run the model, or we'd like to at least confer so that we're able to use it. I didn't know the appropriate venue in which to bring this up, and I was hoping that it wouldn't be an issue, but it is a practical one. And so here we are. And so I'm putting it in front of everybody now.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz, and I appreciate you bringing it up now. And it sounds like something that maybe can be resolved with a discussion with the sites authority team. So I will refer that over to you, Mr. Hitchings, and all of the team to, if you can. Sounds like this is not the technical way to describe it, but get an unlocked version of the tool, if at all possible. And then if there are further challenges in that respect, then certainly, Mr. Schutz, you can come back to me and we can discuss that further. But hopefully that can be resolved. Thank you.
Yes, Hearing Officer Kenzie. Yeah, we will coordinate. This is the first we had heard of that, so we will make sure that the tool is usable, and we'll coordinate as needed.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And I would have contacted the authority, but I didn't know, given the protocols, whether that was appropriate. And so I waited till now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other procedural matters we should address before we turn to the first rebuttal witness, which I believe is Ms. Bizzoni? All right, then with that, who should I turn to, Ms. Chester, or who should I turn to present Ms. Bizzoni? Okay, Ms. Chester, great. And do we have Ms. Bizzoni with us in the room? Yes, I see. You see her there. Ms. Bizzoni, if you would please turn your camera on and I will swear you in. I know you've been with us before, but I will administer the oath once again since it's been a while. And then I will hand things over to Ms. Chester. If you would please raise your right hand. Ms. Bizzoni, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Ms. Chester.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Kenzie. For clarification, the purpose of this panel is to address rebuttal testimony regarding water availability. You'll note that Ms. Bizzoni is also appearing on another site's rebuttal witness panel, panel 2. Her panel 1 summary will only address the specific topic applicable here, just for context. Ms. Bizzoni, could you please state your full name for the record?
Angela Bizzoni.
Do you understand that you are presenting your testimony under oath?
Yes.
Is exhibit cites 395 through paragraph 27 an accurate statement of your written testimony for this rebuttal portion of the proceeding?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
I did.
Does your written testimony cite other exhibits that were submitted as part of the rebuttal portion of this proceeding?
Yes, cites 396.
And did you confirm that the exhibit submitted as cites 396 is a true and correct copy of the documents referenced in your written testimony?
Yes, I did, and it is.
Is your firsthand knowledge of this exhibit reflected in your written testimony, cites 395?
Yes.
Is exhibit cites 406 an accurate summary presentation of your written rebuttal testimony?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare that summary presentation?
I did.
At this time, would you please summarize your testimony submitted for this portion of the proceeding as set forth in cites 406?
Yes, and Ms. Mullen, can you please pull up cites 406? Sorry, adjusting my screen. That changed my view a little bit. Okay. Good morning, Hearing Officer Kinsey and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity today to summarize my written rebuttal testimony. Next slide. This morning, I will present testimony regarding water availability for the sites project. I will cover other portions of my testimony regarding exchanges and Delta exports as part of the next panel. Next slide. The water availability topics I will cover include Sacramento Valley water year type, climate change, conclusions from our water availability analysis, diversions and delta salinity, the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan update, and voluntary agreements. Next slide. I will start by addressing the testimony of Dr. Swanson. Dr. Swanson has questioned whether the sites project will be able to divert quantities presented in the water availability analysis. This was based in part on her review of the frequency of dry and critical water year types, during which there is typically less water available for diversion by the sites project, as well as climate change conditions. Next slide. This is a table showing the frequency of Sacramento Valley water year type frequencies during multiple time periods. We'll not go through this whole table because obviously there are a lot of numbers here, but there are a few things that I will point out before moving on to summarizing my conclusions from reviewing this information. To orient us, across the top are time periods, including those associated with the site's water availability analyses, and those referred to by Dr. Swanson in her testimony. Along the left are the water year types: wet, above normal, below normal, dry, and critical. And then at the bottom are the combined frequency of the two wetter year types, wet and above normal, and the drier year types, dry and critical. In her testimony, Dr. Swanson focused on the frequency of drier year types. However, from a water availability perspective, it is more informative to consider the wetter year types during which the site's diversion criteria are more likely to be met. Starting with the two time periods to the right of center, 1906 to 1979 and 1980 to 2023, Dr. Swanson noted that there was a 50% increase from 30 to 45% in dry and critical year types between these two time periods. However, as I mentioned, this is less important than the frequency of the wetter year types, which during these same time periods was 47% during 1906 to 1977 and 43% during 1980 to 2023. Dr. Swanson also focused on the frequency of drier year types in her conclusions regarding the site's water availability analysis, noting that the frequency of dry and critical water year types was about 37% in the periods associated with the calcium 2 and face value analyses, while the frequency of those year types increased to 45% during 2004 to 2023. This appears to ignore the historical analysis submitted with the application, which evaluates water availability during 2000 to 2021. This analysis considers almost all of the years in the 2004 to 2023 time period mentioned by Dr. Swanson. And importantly, this analysis shows that there is water available for the site's project in similar volumes and frequencies as the other water availability methods. Next slide. Based on a review of the distribution of water year types over the various time periods and findings of the site's water availability analysis, we see that there is less water available for the project during dry and critical year types. It is during these water year types that site storage partners will have a higher need for water supply from site's reservoir. Diversions to storage will primarily be in wet and above normal water years, which is also illustrated by the water availability analysis and why it is important to evaluate these water year types. Next slide. Review of the water type frequencies also shows that smaller sample sizes are inherently more variable. And the addition of a single year, such as 2024, which was an above normal water year type, can have a relatively large change on the distribution. The Sites Authority has a CalSIM 2 model which evaluates water operations of the project. CalSIM 2 period extends from 2022 to 2003, which includes dry year sequences. These dry sequences have been evaluated by the Sites Authority and storage partners and illustrate the important water supply that could be provided from Sites Reservoir during droughts. Next slide. Dr. Swanson's testimony also notes that climate change is increasing the frequency of dry and critical water year types, an increase of droughts, which in part led to her belief that it is questionable if the sites project is viable as a climate resilient water supply project. However, DWR states on their climate change websites that climate change is expected to result in more variable weather patterns, and we are more likely to see larger and warmer storms. It is these larger and warmer storms that the sites projects intends to capture so that the water can be released for use during dry and critical years for communities, farms, businesses, and environmental uses. Next slide. In Mr. Walker's supplemental testimony, he presented an updated historical water availability tool, which estimates water availability and diversions considering the criteria in the operations ITP. We have extended this tool and also used it to evaluate potential diversions to Sites Reservoir in real time without consideration of face value demands. The figure on the slide is that evaluation for September through December 2024. The modeling shows the first potential diversions during the month of November and the 25 years analyzed in the historical tool. This is important for two reasons. First, it is a potential example of the shift to larger storms with a changing climate described by DWR. Second, it also illustrates the limitations of smaller sample sizes. The longer period of analysis included in the CalSIM 2 model, for example, which is 82 years compared to the 25 years in the historical analysis, shows the potential for diversion in all months of the proposed diversion to storage season of September through June. This review of water year type frequencies and climate variations emphasizes the importance of reviewing the results of the multiple water availability analyses collectively. Overall, the site's models and analyses illustrate that there is water available for appropriation and diversion by the project. Next slide. I will now discuss a couple of topics raised by Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson proposed that the site's project diversion to storage season be limited to December 1 through March 31. This was in part because it has been shown that there is typically less water available during September through November, and in part because he says that diversions during April through June 14th will have potential effects to in-delta salinity. Next slide. As I have just mentioned, the Sites Authority's water availability analysis has shown that there is water in all months of the proposed diversion season. Although there may be less water potentially available for diversion in certain months, that does not justify precluding those months from the season. Diversions to storage in any month of the diversion season support overall water supply of the project. Next slide. In regard to the suggestion that the site's diversion to storage season should not extend past March 31, Mr. Wilson did not present any information showing that diversions to Sites Reservoir after that date would affect water quality at any specific Delta location. The Sites Authority analyzed the effects of sites operations in the Delta using DSM-2, which is a hydrodynamic model that simulates residence time in its salinity calculations. These effects are analyzed and described in the final EIR-EIS. Next slide. The proposed diversion criteria result in diversions to storage occurring during times of higher flow and when the delta is in an excess condition. Because of this, a limited diversion season is not justified. However, the site's authority would also not want to exacerbate any conditions within the delta during drier conditions when water quality control plan requirements are modified by a temporary urgency change order. We have proposed a term that would prevent diversions when a TUC order modifies delta requirements that are directly affected by Sacramento River flows. The exact language of this proposed term is included in my written testimony on page 12. Next slide. Mr. Wilson also proposed a special term that would commit the site's authority to accept the default implementation of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan objectives or negotiate a voluntary agreement with the State Water Board. Next slide. The Water Quality Control Plan update is in draft form, and the State Water Board has not yet determined what conditions may apply to new projects. The site's application acknowledges and requests standard permit term 96 be included in any issued water right. This provides the appropriate process to incorporate any needed terms due to the Water Quality Control Plan update. Next slide. Finally, I will discuss a topic in Mr. Schute's testimony regarding sites diversions and the voluntary agreements, or VAs. In his testimony, Mr. Schutz relied upon the site's historical analysis results to explain potential effects of the project on delta outflow. The conclusions he presented regarding potential change in delta outflow appeared to be based on annual values. Next slide. The analyses developed by the site's authority to consider how the project may interact with VA flows both focused on sub-annual time steps because the VA flow assets were modeled to be used during March through May of above normal, below normal, and dry years. The daily comparison was developed to evaluate how the project diversions may interact with the VA flow assets. And the monthly comparison was developed to evaluate how the project may affect delta outflow under the VAs. Next slide. Mr. Schute's review of a potential annual reductions in delta outflow is uninformative to the question of how the site's project may interact with the VAs and affect delta outflow. The site's analysis showed that the site's diversions would have limited interaction with VA assets and a limited reduction in delta outflow. And with that, I have concluded the summary of topics in my testimony regarding water availability.
Thank you, Ms. Bizzoni. I will turn to the coordinating NGO parties. I'm not sure who to look to first. May have
that's me.
Mr. Schutz, there we go. Sorry. I had trouble seeing the room. Mr. Schutz, please, if you have questions for Ms. Bizzoni, go ahead.
I do. Thank you very much. Good morning, Ms. Bizzoni. Nice to see you again. A lot of this has to do with testimony and rebuttal of my testimony, and I'll try to avoid making this something that seems like a personal back and forth. It's not personal. Could we please pull up cites 395, Ms. Bizzoni's written testimony, and turn to page 13. Ms. Bizzoni, on lines 16 to 18 of your rebuttal testimony, you characterize my review of potential annual reductions in delta outflow as uninformative to the question as to the questions of how the project may interact with VA flow assets and affect delta outflow. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Would you please define what you mean by the term interact in this passage?
The term interact is what we analyzed with the daily comparison. And what we looked at there were the diversions that could occur to the sites project alongside the times that VA flow assets would be in the Sacramento River system, and assessed the overlap or interaction of the possibility of sites project diversions with the VA flow assets being in the river.
So, in other words, you're talking about diverting when sites is diverting at the same time that VA flows, VA parties are releasing VA flow assets. Is that correct?
I would say it slightly differently. I would say that all of the sites diversion criteria were met on those days, which may allow for a potential diversion, which is why we viewed it as there's this potential interaction. That does not necessarily mean that if VA flow assets were in the Sacramento River that a diversion would actually occur. It's just that those days all diversion criteria were met.
So, in looking at interaction or them interacting, you're looking at simultaneous time periods. That's the time scale you're looking at. Is that correct?
Correct. It was on a daily basis.
I see. And so if, for example, sites was diverting for 1 week and the VA party is released VA flow assets the following week, that under your definition would not be interacting?
Correct.
Okay. And that goes for longer time periods as well, months or something like that. Is that correct?
Correct. We defined interaction as a daily time step.
All right, very good. Thank you. And did you understand my testimony as addressing that issue?
Objection, vague. Can you state the issue?
Did you understand my testimony as addressing whether or not there would be simultaneous VA flow releases and opportunities for sites that divert on a daily basis?
I believe that as we see in the final sentence of the paragraph above, lines 5 through 7.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, right here, that your analysis looked at the interaction of VA flows and sites diversions on an annual basis and not an instantaneous basis. That's
All right.
my understanding.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Bizzoni, do you understand that the VA flow assets are designed to be additive?
Objection, not in evidence.
Let's see. I'm trying to think of an efficient way to get to this. Um, maybe Ms. Bizzoni, do you have an understanding of how the VA assets would work if implemented? Very open-ended. You know where this is going.
Yes, generally.
All right. So yeah, I think we've established some knowledge of and then do we have, I guess, what do we have in the record? Do we have a
Could
description?
I
of
do
the
something
record?
and
Yeah,
maybe
go ahead,
this
Mr.
will make
Shute.
it more specific, Ms.
Great.
Kinsey? If we could pull up AHO 279, PDF page 2300. This is the draft staff report combined into one enormous PDF. And you're gonna have to scroll in for these old eyes, please. Zoom in. Thank you. If you go to the bottom of the page. And please go to the bottom of the page. There we go. Oh, excuse me, it's the top of the page. I'm very sorry. Do you see in the second sentence there, Ms. Bizzoni, where it says flow assets would be additive to the 2019 BIOPS condition and would vary according to the water year type? Do you see that?
I do see that.
And do you understand that?
I understand what the sentence says. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And is it your understanding that the flow assets that the VA parties have committed are quantified on an annual basis, even if the months in which those assets are deployed are not spread over the entire year?
I'm going to object. I don't think we've established Ms. Bizzoni's knowledge or understanding of this document.
Ms. Bizzoni testified about the interaction of the voluntary agreements and the sites diversions, and both on a monthly basis and on a daily basis. And so I think it's reasonable to expect she has some understanding of the how the voluntary agreements flow assets would work. And I don't think that that's outside the scope of what she's provided testimony about.
I think
my objection is specific to this document.
Well, Ms. Bizzoni, are you familiar with this document? Have you read it before? Start with that.
I believe I have read portions of it. We moved very quickly to what this page exactly is. So I believe so.
Well, let me ask you this, Ms. Bizzoni. What is your knowledge of or an understanding of the VA flow assets based on? What information is it based on? Is there a document in particular that you relied on to understand how that would work?
I do believe it's this document, and I'm not 100% what this is, because we moved quickly and I haven't looked at it in quite a while. It was also dependent on
pages.
Yeah. And it was also dependent on the modeling that was submitted, that MBK, primarily Mr. Walker, processed, and those daily and monthly comparisons, the results of which I reviewed, and then we co-authored the accompanying memorandum. So I have, like I said, I believe this is the document that I have reviewed, but it has been a number of months, and I apologize.
Ms. Kenzie, it is awkward when the exhibit is combined into one enormous PDF to sort of orient Ms. Bizzoni or anybody. This is, you see the numbers there, 9.3.3 at the top there, Ms. Bizzoni?
Yes.
That refers to Chapter 9 of the draft staff report, which is what this document is. It was released in, I believe it was September, October 2023.
I think if we go to the first page, we can confirm this information.
The first page of the chapter or the first page? I think you can actually go to the first page of the chapter with the sort of thumbnails that exist on the side, or you could go to the first page of the entire document.
Let's try the first page of the document.
Okay.
I mean, would that be at page 1? Let's try that. All right,
Yes, it would.
great. And then scroll down to the
Scroll
title,
down to the
please.
title. And then can you bring up the thumbnails, please? And if you'd scroll down to 9. Chapter 9, there it is. And so chapter 9 is the proposed voluntary agreements. And we were situated within that chapter, Ms. Bizzoni.
Okay. Thank you. And I am, yes, so there was the draft staff report, and we did this over a year ago. I'm just taking a second to refresh my memory. I apologize. This is going on much longer than it should. Yes, thank you. Thank you for letting me orient myself.
Very good. So are we clear, Ms. Chester, of what we're looking at?
Yes, for my purposes.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Bizzoni, so do you understand that one of the hearing issues for this hearing addresses, and I'll just read it. Should any permit issued pursuant to application 25517X01 include condition to protect proposed voluntary agreement flows or the flows to which the proposed voluntary agreement flows are intended to be additive in the event the Bay Delta plan is updated to include voluntary agreements?
Yes, I have read that item topic.
Thank you. And are you aware, Ms. Bizzoni, that the State Water Board, working on the update of the Bay Delta plan, is also very concerned about protecting flows to which VA flow assets are intended to be additive?
Objection. I don't think Ms. Bizzoni can confirm or speak to DWR's intent, or excuse me, the Water Board's intention.
I think that's fair. Try a different.
Could we please turn to page 2491 of the same document? So if you'd scroll down to the bottom there of that page, 9.9.2, and the last paragraph, it describes what they call modular alternative 6A, protection of voluntary agreement flows. Do you see that?
Yes, I do. And I apologize. I get really confused by all of the names. Is this the scientific basis report?
It is not. It is the draft staff report that was published subsequent to the scientific basis report supplement. And
Okay. Okay, I apologize. I am familiar with this document. We did not rely upon this in development of our analyses. We relied upon the scientific basis report. I am so sorry. But I am familiar with this document and with modular alternative 6A.
Right. And do you see at the bottom there, it says, and we'll have to find it, it's hard to find. The document discusses measures to protect the base upon which the VA flows are intended to be added from new or expanded water diversions.
Yes, I see that sentence.
Thank you very much. And the requirement suggested there would cover the months of January through June. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Okay. Could we return to Ms. Bizzoni's rebuttal testimony, sites 395, page 13? And there on, if you'd scroll down to lines 15 and 16. 13, lines 15. You suggest that a sub-annual analysis to evaluate the interaction of sites, diversions, and VA flow assets is less uninformative, and it's lines 16 and 17, excuse me, than an annual analysis, correct?
Objection. I think that misstates testimony in front of us, but Ms. Bizzoni can speak specifically to the language.
Mr. Schutz, will you just
Sure.
try that one again?
I'll state it again.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You say that my review of annual reductions is uninformative, correct?
Yes, that is what this says.
And you suggest in line 15 and 16 that you made a sub-annual analysis, correct?
2 subannual analyses, correct.
Sub-annual, okay, very good. So can we please go to AHO 48, page 30, to look at some sub-annual analyses? And if we'd scroll down, please, to the bottom of the page. Now, AHO 48048 is the analysis you're referring to in your rebuttal testimony. Is that correct, Ms. Bizzoni?
Yes, along with the accompanying spreadsheet analyses.
Thank you. And there are several sub-annual analyses presented here, correct? There's one from February to May, one from January to June, one from March to June, and one from March to May, correct?
Correct.
Great. So drawing your attention to the season January to June, you see the lines shaded in gray?
I do.
Let's look at the seasonal changes in the second column, the VA flow additions, with the combined change caused by the VA flow condition additions and sites diversions. In above normal years, the sites diversions are shown as 580,000 acre feet, correct? Above normal, January through June. VA without LJSR, third column.
I'm sorry, but what did I see that number, but how did you describe that number?
That is, as I understand it, that is the result, changes in delta outflow as a result of the voluntary agreements without the lower San Joaquin additions.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then the next column to the right is the VA without the lower San Joaquin additions. We're not talking about those at the moment, but with the sites diversions, correct? If you combine.
Correct. That is the annual average change in above normal year types over the calcium period analyzed, correct?
But when you say annual, do you mean to say the January through June change?
Sorry, I apologize. Yeah,
Thank you.
January through June.
Okay, and then looking at the next line down, we go from a net gain of 516,000 acre feet with the VAs to a net gain increase in delta outflow of 191,000 acre feet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So could we quickly pull up my testimony, CSPA 1C, and go to page 8? And in paragraph 21, if you'd scroll down, please. It says that the combined effects of sites diversion and voluntary agreements would have resulted in an annual average reduction in delta outflow of 84,000 acre feet. Do you see that?
I see that.
Okay. And going down to the next paragraph, it says that the it says that sites would reduce the VA flow addition in below normal years by an average of 65%. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that sentence.
Okay, could we go back, please, to AHO page 30, table 7? Remembering those numbers. So my analysis showed a reduction in above normal years when you combine the two elements of negative 80,000 acre feet. And your analysis here in January through June shows negative 20, correct?
Yes, in January through June, whereas I believe that your number was an annual number, so we're not comparing the same thing.
Correct. And in the below normal category, I believe my figure showed a 65% reduction. I'll let you do the math, but I'm going to represent to you that what we're seeing here for the below normal represents a 63% reduction.
Objection, there's not a question asked.
Do you agree that there's a 63% reduction as shown in below normal years from the column 3 to column 4?
I will pull up a calculator.
Absolutely.
I arrive at 59%.
59%.
Let me see. We're looking at below normal.
Correct.
Okay. Let me
151 and 516.
516 minus 191 out of 516. Oh, I apologize. I had a typo in my first one. But where is that typo? Divided. I do arrive at 63%. I apologize. Typo in my
Very
first
good.
calculation.
So overall, the numbers compared here, whether it's done on an annual basis or a sub-annual basis in this case, the trend is the same. Would you agree in both above normal and below normal cases?
if you're considering the entire January through June, they appear similar. I don't know if that's a trend, but the decreases appear similar in scale.
Thank you.
January through June, though, is just one of the 4 presented here.
Correct. So isn't it true that if when one were to look only, for example, at the monthly figures from March through May in the shaded section at the bottom, that would account heavily for the months in which VA assets were being released?
Correct. Based on the modeling submitted with the scientific basis report.
Right, and the general description of the intent of the VAs, correct?
Yes.
But that March through May period would not account for the months of December, January, and February, where there are likely to be high sites diversions and very little release of VA flows, of flow assets from the VAs. Is that correct?
Correct. It would not include those months.
Not just whether it would not include those months, but it would not account for, it would have more heavily account for the times that there were high VA releases, but it would not account for the times when there were relatively high sites diversions, correct?
Yes, we do expect there to be sites diversions in December, January through and February. It's hard to characterize it as high on. We do expect diversions during those months and that there would not be flow assets in those months.
Okay. And so it's reflected in the values in the columns too, where March through May you show more positive values than in January through June, correct?
Objection vague, more positive values.
You show larger net additions to flow in March through May than you do in January through June, in column 4 specifically.
Yes.
Thank you. Could we please go back to sites 395, Ms. Bizzoni's rebuttal testimony, and look at page 13? And specifically, on lines 14 and 15, you refer to page 31 of AHO 48, correct? On line 15.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm sorry to toggle back and forth, but I'm just trying to establish where I'm coming from here. Now, if we could go to page 31 of AHO 48, please. And I apologize, Ms. Mullen, to lead you on this chase. Now, here at the top of page 31 of AHO 48, Ms. Bizzoni, you're talking about using calcium 2 modeling with post-processing in order to get a more accurate view of how VA flow assets would actually affect delta outflow and how sites diversions would actually affect delta outflow. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes. Two different versions of calcium were post-processed for this analysis. And each the models were specific to either VAs or sites. It wasn't a combined model that evaluated them together.
We understand that. Thank you.
Okay.
And that's clear from the description in this technical.
Okay.
But generally speaking, for both of those calcium exercises, by using the calcium 2 with post-processing to evaluate each, you account for system operations in place in other places. Is that correct?
Objection vague in other places.
You account for example. Okay, let's go back and break it down. By using calcium 2 with post-processing to evaluate the effects of sites, you account for system operations already in place that prevent water that now passes the site's points of diversion from becoming delta outflow. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, that so the sites model has an established baseline, and to assess the changes from the sites project, we looked at delta outflow under the baseline condition and delta outflow under the with sites condition. And that provided us changes in delta outflow. That baseline that is in calcium 3 and used for the scientific basis report has, I assume, a different baseline, if for no other reason it's a completely different model platform.
A different baseline than the modeling of the VAs. Is that what you're speaking about?
No, a different baseline as the modeling of sites.
Okay. So, sort of taking it up a step, is it true that what you're doing by using calcium is you're modeling the operations of the entire system, whereas with the water availability analysis tool, you're simply looking at diversions, in the sites case, at diversions to sites or potential diversions to sites. You're not looking at what else happens through the entire system. Is that fair?
Objection.
Oh,
Sorry, I believe that was compound.
Were there two parts to the question, Mr. Sheets?
I was just trying to clarify what I meant, but I'll try to state it again.
Okay, thank you.
By using calcium 2 rather than the water availability analysis tool, you're looking at the operation of the entire basically Central Valley system, as opposed, which is what you're looking at in calcium, as opposed to the diversions at potential diversions at sites alone, which is what the WAA tool looks at. Is that correct?
I think there's a bit more to it than that, but at a very high level, the site's historical WAA tool is simply looking at the diversion criteria and evaluating how much sites could potentially have diverted on a given day. it does not look at the system really beyond the potential for diversions.
Right.
And it does not evaluate delta outflow, which is why we use two different tools or two different comparisons. CalSim provides that change in delta outflow because it is a full operations model.
Thank you. And the calcium 2 run that's referenced here on page 31 would also account for water that sites releases back into the system, correct?
Yes, it's a full operations model that includes releases from sites reservoir.
And the WAA tool does not include that, correct?
No, it only looks at potential diversions.
So let's talk a little bit about what post-processing means. Do you use the post-processing to calculate the daily operations and aggregate that into monthly values when you're doing that, when you're combining that with the calcium model? Or do you, let's ask that question alone first. Is that what you're doing, or is that inaccurate?
Calcium, both calcium 2 and calcium 3 are monthly time step models.
And so is the post-processing designed to calculate the daily operations to put into the model? Or does the post-processing take what comes out of the model and disaggregate it into daily values?
We do not use the in this analysis, calcium was not used on a daily time step. That's why we had the calcium was the monthly comparison, and the historical WAA tool is the daily comparison. We did not use calcium results. This is a post-processing of calcium results, which are on a monthly time step, and were only used on a monthly time step.
And would you describe the post-processing in brief for those of us who are mortals and don't understand all the technical details?
I will attempt. Mr. Walker is definitely more of our post-process expert, but my understanding is we can take the monthly time series results from both the baseline run. So let's talk about the sites version. So calcium 2, we take the monthly results of the baseline or no action alternative, and the monthly time series results of the alternative 3 in this case. And we subtract one from the other and arrive at our changes in delta outflow. So we would have monthly time series delta outflow under no action, monthly time series with sites, and subtract those to arrive at changes.
And that's what you mean by post-processing?
Yes.
Okay, so you're not actually looking at the daily diversions in this model, or even the daily releases. It's over a monthly time step, correct?
Objection vague. Which model?
The calcium 2 modeling for sites that's referred to on page 31 here.
Correct. Calcium is a monthly model.
So you don't have a single model that models sites diversions, VA flow additions, and other operations of the Bay Delta system all at once. Is that correct?
That's correct. VAs have been modeled in calcium 3, and sites at this time is only modeled in calcium 2. And that code, as I understand it, is not compatible to create a simply combined analysis.
Okay. And if you'd scroll down to page 32, please, Ms. Mullen. At bullet 3, keep going down, please. It says that a robust assessment of the potential effects would require development of a single model with both VAs and sites reservoir, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so since you haven't completed a calcium 3 model to model the sites project yet, in the meantime, you have to use the tools available and make different inferences that you can using those tools, correct?
Yes, and I think that's what we've done here with two comparisons presented based on our available tools.
Thank you very much. Could we go back to Ms. Bizzoni's testimony, sites 395 to page 3 at the top, please?
Mr. Schutz, I apologize for interrupting. I'm wondering if we're near a good time to take a break.
I have 5 more minutes for this witness.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take a break first if that's.
No, well, let's please, unless it's let's please keep going and then we'll break after that.
Very good. Thank you. Now, it says here at, let's see, at lines 5 and 6, these witnesses do not consider the collective result of the authority's WAA analysis or the intended application of the analyses. Do you see that?
I do.
Ms. Bizzoni, is it fair to say that the intended application of the analyses that you are discussing is to demonstrate that there is unappropriated water available for appropriation by the proposed sites project?
I think in this context and specifically related to your testimony, it was regarding the two comparisons within the analysis that we performed a daily analysis to really look at the potential interaction of diversions, and we performed a monthly analysis to look at potential changes in delta outflow. And those two intended applications can't necessarily be applied to both of them, I guess is the best way to say it. They each had a different intended purpose and application.
Okay. Do you understand that witnesses other than yourself, including me, have different reasons to evaluate and consider the information that you collected?
Objection calls for speculation about other witnesses' intent.
That's fair. I think you can move on, Mr. Schutz, to your next question in this line.
You understand that part of my intent in presenting my testimony was to show how sites diversions could reduce the benefits of additional flows provided by the update of the Bay Delta plan?
Objection calls for speculation regarding your intent.
I'm not sure. Let me ask this, Mr. Schutz. Where are you going with, I'm trying to understand why Ms. Bizzoni's understanding of your intent as to how to use certain information is relevant.
I think because Ms. Bizzoni has stated here in her rebuttal testimony that other witnesses have not understood how she and Mr. Walker intended different analyses to be used. And the question I'm asking is that goes to the fact that other witnesses may have other purposes that don't necessarily follow Ms. Bizzoni's and Mr. Walker's purposes, but that they may have other valid purposes for evaluating the information that they provided.
Hearing
I-
Officer Kenzie, I apologize for the interruption, but I would object to the extent that Mr. Schute's statements seek to testify on the intent or purpose of the analyses.
Understood. And I think Mr. Schutz, I don't think is this line, I don't think is particularly helpful to me in understanding this testimony. I can assure you I will, I understand that the witnesses are coming at this from different points of view and with different intents and purposes. So I would encourage you here to move on to if you have anything left, to move on to your next set of questions.
I'm not sure I love the expression if I have anything left, but I don't have anything left for this witness, Ms. Kenzie. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Bizzoni.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. I just meant, you know what I meant.
I do.
And thank you for bearing with me through my confusion about the multiple Bay Delta.
No, and thank you
documents.
for bearing with me through going through various different documents, but with these technical things, I think it's important to try to clarify things.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Let's go ahead and take a break, and then I will see if there are others from the coordinating NGO parties who have questions for Ms. Bizzoni. We will come back. It's 10:39. Let's come back at 10:50. Thank you. All right, I'll look to the court reporter. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I am. Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful,
you.
thank you. All right, we completed Mr. Schutz's questions for Ms. Bozzoni, and I will look to the remaining NGO parties. Do you have, oh, let's get Mr. Hitchings in the room. Let's see. Do you have additional questions for Ms. Bozzoni?
I have just a few questions. I think I'm probably the only one, but I won't promise that for
I'll look
others.
to the room again after that, but please go ahead, Mr. Busher.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bozzoni. It's good to see you again. I appreciate your time and patience with me as I go through this stuff. I want to start with your discussion about the water year type frequency and your response to Dr. Swanson's testimony. You said this morning and in your presentation as well that diversions to storage occur primarily in wet and above normal water year types. Can you quantify that at all? Like a proportion of the total?
We could definitely pull up our water availability analysis report and look at some of our summary tables that present that by water year type. It's when you view those summary tables, it's typically in those years, although that doesn't discount the other 3 years as also having opportunities for diversion. Excuse me.
Okay. I guess I could, I mean, I'm not looking for a specific answer necessarily, but I could read primarily as like, I don't know, right? Kind of anywhere from 50 to 90% here. Can you give a ballpark proportion of how much of the diversions occur during wet and above normal year types?
I can if we pull up the report and a summary table or two, but not off the top of my head.
All right. And when you say the reports, those are the water availability reports that you were looking at with Mr. Schutz.
That one's specific to the VAs. I believe that our overall water availability analysis is HO 039.
39. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I can look at that. I appreciate that. I don't need to walk through that with you here. I have kind of the same question on the flip side. Do you have an estimate for the proportion of releases from sites reservoir that occur during dry or critical years?
The portion of releases. No, I don't. It's during the releases occur when there's a need for water supply, which typically happens during those drier conditions. And there's also constraints at the Delta export facilities for non-project water that is based on water year type, and you can export non-project water in greater quantities during those drier years. So that's those correlate to more releases, but I cannot quantify that. It's just, again, I'm sure we could pull up a source that summarizes that calcium 2 modeling, but I can't go beyond that without resources.
Thank you. If we could pull up Ms. Bozzoni's presentation, sites 406, and go to slide 5, please. Oh. Ms. Bozzoni, I'll preface this. I mean, I take it that when we are talking about water year type frequency in the future, in various climate change scenarios, right, we're using various sets of past historical data to predict that future. Is that kind of like the 35,000 foot level of this water year type frequency analysis that you and Dr. Swanson and others have performed?
So we're looking at the past water year type frequencies and trying to consider if it's an indication of what water year type frequencies may be in the future. There's no analysis presented here that like is doing that future look. Just to be clear, I think Dr. Swanson focused on 2004 to 2023 as the most recent decade as a potential indication for going forward.
Do you disagree with Dr. Swanson's conclusion that we are likely to have a higher frequency of dry and critical years in the future than we did in the calcium 2 historical record?
I honestly don't know if I agree or disagree. I feel like it's a possibility, but I also have seen over the last 15 years these extremes, and there's a lot of that bouncing back and forth, and so I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. In these various different time periods that are included in your table, do you have an opinion as to whether or which of those periods are most likely to be similar to water year type frequency distribution in the future?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'm happy to respond. I don't think it
Sure,
does.
please. Go ahead, Mr. Busher.
I mean, I want to know if she has an opinion about whether one of those is more representative of likely future conditions or not. I don't think that's speculation about any. She either does.
I think that's fair given the context. Go ahead, Ms. Bizzoni.
I don't think that I could choose one. I do think that when we look at the most recent, that it could be telling, but you can see here that 2004 through 2023 is side by side with 2004 through 2024. And a single above normal year that occurred in 2024 has quite a large change on that. We went from 5% above normal years to 10%. This year, right now, as of the February 1 Bulletin 120, I think it's like a 75% exceedance of being another above normal year. I think that we will continue to see those fluctuations of drought and wet periods, and there may be some changes, but it definitely seems like weather's cyclical, and I don't know if one of these tells us any more information than the other. I think looking at this as a whole was informative. I found this information to be interesting in my review.
Thank you. And you agree that for the 3 time periods here that all post-date the year 2000, the frequency of wet and above normal years is smaller than it is in the calcium 2 period?
Yes, it is. Again, you add in 2024, you add in 2025, and we see a shift there. So it is less.
We could go to slide 7, please. You refer to the historical analysis. That was one of the various water availability analyses that you testified about, or that the authority performed, I guess, as part of its case in chief, correct?
Yes.
And that analysis concluded that water was available for the project only from December to June, correct?
In the version submitted with the application, there had not been a shown opportunity for diversions in September, October, and November. However, as I think it's the next slide shows, when we look at 2024 or water year 25, that there would have been the potential this most recent November. So I think that we see changes in hydrology, and it kind of brings us back to my first bullet here, that our smaller sample sizes can be more variable.
You discussed with Mr. Schutz some aspects of the well, the voluntary agreements and some context within the water quality control plan with respect to that. And you said that you were familiar with the modular alternative 6A. Have you also seen, or are you familiar with the draft program of implementation that was provided by the state board last October?
I have reviewed portions of it.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, I sent an email this morning with a copy of that draft program of implementation attached. I apologize if that was already in the AHO exhibits, but if not, it can be marked as the next Baykeeper one. But if we could pull that document up, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So, Ms. Bizzoni, this is the document I was referring to that you said you've seen part of. If we could go to page 3.
Mr. Busher?
Oh, yeah.
Could I just have 1 second?
Please.
And do we need to, oh, I was gonna say, we can also scroll down here.
Okay, sorry about that. I've had a lingering cough. I didn't want to miss your question.
Not a problem. Please let me know if you need a break. So if we could go to PDF page 89, I believe it is. And at the bottom, yeah, box 4. And it continues at the top of the next page. Are you familiar with box 4, these two concepts for alternative 6A?
I am.
So I guess I'll take these in turn. I'll start with option 1. Has the authority performed an analysis of water availability based on the condition described in option 1?
I'm going to skim it really quick.
Please.
We did not perform a detailed water availability analysis. I believe we did, for, I don't know, lack of a better term, a kind of sensitivity look at this, but nothing formal or reviewed.
Based on that informal or kind of limited analysis that has been performed, do you have an opinion as to whether this condition would impact whether water is available for the reservoir?
Whether water
is available for the project. Sorry.
I don't know if I could say that it would impact whether water is available. I view the availability question a little bit differently. I'd still say that there is water available for the site's reservoir project when considering option 1.
All right. Does the authority have an objection to the inclusion of a term such as option 1 in its water rights permit?
I don't know if I can really speak on behalf of the entire authority, but I would say that at this time, this is a draft that is being evaluated, and so it is not an approved option. And so I think we would object just that it has not gone through its formal process. I also believe that, you know, standard permit term 96, which we've discussed before, would, if that were, well, it would be included. It's a standard one, a mandatory term, that would allow for the final determination of any of these concepts to be included in a permit if and when it was formalized. So considering this is a draft, I feel that we would object.
And if we could scroll down to option 2. Please, again, Ms. Bizzoni, take a second to review that if you need it, but the same questions. Have you done an analysis as to whether adoption of option 2 with the draft staff reports 55% unimpaired flow requirement would affect water availability for the project?
This was a version of this was generally reviewed by the authority in its water availability analysis report. We relied upon the then available modeling that I believe was alternative 4 of Rock-On LTO. So we performed that analysis to generally consider availability under this scenario.
And that, I think alternative 4 was the right number. I'm losing track of alternatives here a little bit, but that was part of the case in chief presentation, was that post-processing of the modeling from the alternative and the LTO, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I should also note that the Division of Water Rights developed a tool to also analyze this, and the authority submitted the results of that. And I can't remember what that exhibit number is, but that was also part of the case in chief and application package.
And then the same question I had about option 1, does the authority object to a condition on its permit?
I would provide the
Even
same
if-
answer that while this is in draft form, I think it's more appropriate that anything like this needs to be formally decided before any such term be included.
And then the you were discussed with Mr. Schutz, and I apologize for perhaps messing up the technical details here, but that there are 2 different calcium models that don't talk to each other, but that you use the outputs for to analyze the interaction between the VAs and the site's diversions. Is that same kind of lack of ability to have a single model do that true for the unimpaired flow requirement as well?
I believe so. I am not aware of any modeling of the unimpaired flow requirement to rely upon other than the alternative for Rock-On LTO, which I'm not, yeah, I'll stop there.
All right. And then I think the last question I have, if we could go back to Ms. Bizzoni's presentation and go to page 13. think this is still in panel one. Does the authority, well, the second bullet point on your presentation describes the proposed permit term that I think was in Mr. Wilson's testimony, that there be no diversions when there's a temporary urgency change order in effect that modifies Delta water quality requirements. Does the authority object to a condition on its permit that restricts its ability to divert during the time that a temporary urgency change is in effect?
Objection.
Oh,
Just as Ms. Bizzoni stated, she cannot speak for the authority, but can offer her opinion.
well, but I do really want to clarify that this is not a term proposed by Mr. Wilson. This is a term proposed by the authority included in my testimony.
All right, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay,
I did not
Just
understand
trying
that
to
this morning.
find the page.
I apologize.
page 12, if you need a reference.
I apologize. I misunderstood that. I appreciate the clarification. So the authority does not object to this term.
No, we have proposed it.
Those are the only questions I have for Ms. Bizzoni. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. I will look back to the room. Are there others with the coordinating NGO parties who have questions for Ms. Bizzoni on this topic? Then do I have any representatives from the tribal parties who have questions for Ms. Bizzoni? And with that, I will look to SDWA. Mr. Reese, do you have questions for Ms. Bizzoni?
Good morning. Yes, I do have a few questions for her.
Please.
Ms. Bizzoni, have a few questions regarding sites 395, your written testimony as opposed to your summary. First one, if we look at paragraph 16 of your testimony, and we can bring that up if that's helpful.
I have it here, but
You have it? Okay, as long as you have it. You say the potential to divert flows in November 2024 also illustrates the limitations of smaller sample sizes. Are there other years through the analysis that you've done regarding water availability that show water available for diversion in November?
in the calcium 2 analysis.
Pardon me?
In the calcium 2 analysis of the water availability analysis.
Okay, and how frequently was water available for diversion in November, if you recall?
I do not. We could pull up the report. It has a table that would summarize that, but I cannot say off the top of my head.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Also, with regard to paragraph 16 of your testimony, do you know if the calcium 2 monthly time step accounts for the flow dependent requirements that are contained in, as I understand them, that are contained in section 9.14 of the site's ITP?
The ITP criteria have not been incorporated into a calcium 2 model. This is referring to the model submitted with the water right application, which predated the ITP.
Okay. Do you have an opinion if the daily time step models used in the historical analysis offer a more accurate estimate of when and how much water is available for diversion to sites?
Objection. Vague. More accurate compared to what?
More accurate compared to the calcium monthly time step?
I I think that calcium is able to consider a lot of other operational aspects that the historical water availability analysis doesn't. That one being that the historical tool just is looking for the opportunities to divert. It's not a it's not an operations model, so it doesn't simulate or consider whether there is capacity in the reservoir, for instance, on a given day. It just says whether or not that condition on that day met all of the diversion requirements. So I think they're very different tools and answer the question very differently.
Okay, so in your opinion, they're not a more accurate result or a more accurate analysis, just a different analysis?
Yeah, I think they're a different analysis, and I really think it's one of the reasons why I know we kind of continuously say it, that we really feel that it's important to look at all of the analyses collectively. They each provide different information.
If you can scroll down or reference paragraph 23 of your testimony. You say that notwithstanding the above, diversions to storage in sites reservoir may have effects on Bay Delta water quality control plan that are directly affected by Sacramento River flows. What do you mean by they may have an effect?
There are locations within the Delta that are on the Sacramento River that are within the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan and D1641 with specific requirements. And the diversions to storage can have effects on those depending on flows, overall flows in the system.
Okay. When you're referring to may have effects on, well, your testimony there regarding effects on Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan requirements are not speaking to requirements on the San Joaquin side or in the South Delta. Is that correct?
Correct. We don't see those being directly affected by the diversions with the Sacramento and the changes in the Sacramento River flows.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not Sacramento River flows generally reach the South Delta?
Do not have an opinion.
Do you have an opinion, or I should strike that? Do you think that Sacramento River flows don't reach the South Delta?
I really think it depends on the flow. And I think it can depend on a lot of conditions. The flows from the San Joaquin at the time, crossgate, tidal influences. I think that there's a whole lot going on within the Delta. I'm sure, well, I know that the Sacramento River flows at times are within the South Delta, Central and South Delta from what I've seen from DSM-2 modeling results, but I don't know if that's on a daily basis, for instance.
Right, fair enough. Still in paragraph 23 of your testimony, you say that a limitation to the diversion to storage season is neither justified nor supported by information provided by Mr. Wilson. What would, in your opinion, justify a limitation of the diversion to storage season as proposed by Mr. Wilson?
Objection calls for speculation.
It's not speculation. I'm asking her if she has an opinion as to what would justify such a limitation.
I'll allow the question. Go ahead, Ms. Bizzoni.
I would think a showing that in every year that sites potentially had the opportunity to divert April 1 through June 14th, that there were significant changes, and I believe the testimony was focused on South and Central Delta water quality to an extent that would harm or injure operations. And I believe that the examples relied upon by Mr. Wilson in his testimony, the years he specified, did not actually show diversions occurring in those dates. So the information that he provided did not appear to support his conclusion.
Okay. So your view is that if there were impacts, water quality impacts shown in every year to the South Delta, that would be necessary to justify a limitation on the diversion season, specifically with regard to April to June?
I think it would be hard to justify a blanket cutoff of at March 31 based on like a single year, for example. There may be conditions such as what we have proposed here, if a temporary urgency change petition were in place, where you know, not allowing for diversions is reasonable. I don't think, though, that saying that diversions in every single April through June 14th would cause an issue. I don't think I worded that well, sorry. But
Go
yeah.
ahead. Are you, I don't want to cut you off. Are you done?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Would you agree that generally the April, May, and June flows, that the peak flows in April, May, and June help to freshen the delta?
Objection, vague, freshen.
I don't know what's vague about freshen. Add additional fresh, clean water through the delta?
I don't have an opinion on the timing of flows.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not the flows that otherwise go through the delta, that if not diverted by sites in April, May, and June, would have an effect on X2?
I don't have an opinion.
Okay. You've testified about this new permit term proposed by sites, which is in paragraph at the end of paragraph 23 of your testimony. In looking at that permit or that proposed term, why doesn't the proposed term include the requirement that San Joaquin River flow or South Delta salinity objectives be met as a precondition of diversions to sites?
Well, in regard to the San Joaquin River flow condition, sites cannot affect those flows, as we are not proposing to divert from that river. In regard to the other locations, when reviewing the DSM-2 data, we saw that diversions really had a limited effect to those locations that were more directly influenced by Sacramento River flows. And that is the locations, or that's the locations identified here.
Okay, so then if there's not an effect shown, what would be the problem in including that language that the 3 locations in the South Delta where the water quality objectives are measured what would be the harm in including those in this TUCP condition that sites proposes?
Objection calls for speculation. You're
I'm
asking
asking her, in her opinion, what would be the harm in including that language?
I think, and let me, I'll give you your question back, Mr. Rees, after this, but I would replace that in harm. What would be the impact on sites reservoir diversions? I'll ask it that way, and then we can go to Mr. Rees if he has a different version.
No, I like that better.
Thank you.
I think that if there's locations that sites diversions are not affecting and there are other influences affecting those locations, that it doesn't make sense to limit sites by something that its diversions are not going to have a change to.
But won't some of the diversions or some of the site's water be rediverted by the federal and state project contractors?
This term and the review of materials to support this term is only in regard to diversions. It is not in any way related to the release of water and subsequent export of water. It is specifically focused on diversions to storage.
Thank you. You answered my next question. I think others have been through this before, but you mentioned the inclusion of term 96 a few minutes ago. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Does term 96 provide any specific protections for South Delta water quality or require any specific actions by anyone, in your opinion?
Term 96 will provides for and acknowledges the continuing jurisdiction of the State Water Board to impose terms consistent with implementing a water quality control plan update. So if there was a need or if there were specific terms in the update that would need to be implemented, that would provide the ability for a new term to be included in the site's permit.
Doesn't the state board already have that jurisdiction regardless of this term 96?
I would assume that there are avenues for the state board to update any permit. My understanding is standard permit term 96 just kind of puts the diverter on notice that this is something that can happen. And it's just more a formalization and acknowledgement of those processes.
Thank you, Ms. Bozzoni. I don't have any more questions regarding your testimony and for panel 1. I do have some for panel 2.
Thank you, Mr. Rees. Ms. Meserve, do you have any questions for Ms. Bozzoni? Do we have Ms. Meserve on?
Ms. Meserve is not with us today.
Okay, and she doesn't have questions. Mr. King, do you have questions for Ms. Bozzoni?
I do. Thank you, Ms. Bozzoni. As I read your exhibit today, you didn't discuss any water availability and analysis for the Coosa Basin drain?
That's correct. I am not rebutting any testimony specific to the Coosa Basin drain.
Okay. Okay, so I'll ask one other question then. Your water availability analysis generally is on the calcium 2 model, is that correct?
No, we have 3 methods: the historical analysis, the calcium 2 analysis, and the face value analysis.
What is the end date for those 3 analyses?
They're each different. The calcium 2 model extends to 2003. The face value analysis I believe extends through 2014, although I'm not 100% confident on that. And then the version of our historical analysis submitted with the application went through water year 2021. Mr. Walker recently submitted one that evaluates ITP criteria, and that extends through 2023.
Okay. Are you aware that the Davis Weir Bladder Dam was installed in 2010 by GCID?
I know that there is a bladder dam. I could not verify a date.
Would you dispute that if there's an exhibit, there's actually a presentation by MBK saying that it was installed in 2010? Would you believe that is correct?
Objection, it's not clear that this is within the scope of the rebuttal testimony that Ms. Bizzoni submitted.
I think that's fair. So Mr. King, for cross-examination in rebuttal, it's generally limited to the content of the rebuttal testimony. So we're trying to understand what is the connection with this line of questioning with what Ms. Bizzoni has testified to in her written testimony.
Yes, I'm just trying to get to the limits of the model assumptions and the changes. Let me ask one last question then. Does your model anticipate the water availability impact of the changes of flows in the Coosa Basin drain from the site's project?
Objection, relevance again.
Is there a connection? Where are you pointing to? I mean, can you give us a point in Ms. Bizzoni's testimony? Are your particular model results that you're asking her about?
Well, she mentioned 3 model results. I'm just I guess I'm struggling with that. I guess she would say that since she's not rebutting any of the testimony regarding the scope of the water availability analysis as it relates to flows in Coosa Basin drain, then it's not relevant.
That's correct. I think that's where we're going. And I think we've been over this in the case in chief testimony, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but you eliminated like 95% or 99% of my case in chief testimony. So I'm scrambling to bring it back into evidence.
And the appropriate way to do that is through your own testimony. This is your opportunity to ask Ms. Bizzoni questions about her rebuttal testimony and the specific topics that she addressed.
Okay. Well, I don't think that I have anything else within the scope then. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. King. So I believe that completes the list of cross-examining parties, and unless I'm missing anyone, please speak up now for Ms. Bizzoni on this topic. I am going to go ahead. The hearing team had maybe 1 or 2 questions for you, Ms. Bizzoni, so I'm channeling these. We had a question, just a general question with respect to your testimony in paragraph 17, that's page 9, paragraph 17, about DWR's, where you testified to DWR's Climate Change Basics website and quote from it. And then you state that the project is designed to capture larger and warmer storms. The question from the team was very general, which is, what aspects of the project would you say are designed to capture larger and warmer storms in particular?
Yeah, so I think in comparison to other existing reservoirs, particularly the rim reservoirs, those are situated to also capture snowmelt, whereas sites is situated in the valley and it will have the opportunity to capture precipitation, I should say rain-based storms that are quite a bit warmer than those that produce the snowpack that is above the others. So that's the intent of the larger and warmer storms. I think we're really looking at atmospheric rivers that dump a considerable amount of rainfall.
Thank you. And then Um, well, I think actually this next question may go to the, maybe more appropriate for the next panel, so I will hold it. So with that, I will turn to you, Ms. Chester. Do you have redirect for Ms. Bizzoni?
I believe I do, but I need to identify a document. Could we take a short break?
Yes, let's go ahead and just take 5 minutes and we'll come back at 11:41.
Thank you.
Thank you. On the record. Great, thank you. With that, I will turn to you, Ms. Chester.
Thank you. I just emailed a document over to the general email as well as you, Ms. Kenzie, just to confirm that it was received. I'd like to bring up that document for purposes of redirect.
Great. I received it, so I assume our team has access to it too.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bizzoni, do you recall Mr. Busher asking you questions regarding the authority's position on opinions 1 and 2 of page 89 to 90 of the October 2024 draft Bay Delta Plan update?
Yes, I do remember that.
And are you familiar with the January 30th, 2025 comment letter on the screen that sites and other parties submitted to the State Water Board regarding those options?
Yes, I am.
And is it your understanding, or excuse me, just for clarification, we would submit this to the FTP site in the hearing office as Sites Exhibit 424, I believe is the next number. Ms. Bizzoni, is it your understanding that this letter accurately reflects the authority's positions and concerns regarding those options 1 and 2?
Yes, it does.
And is it your understanding that the first highlighted section here on page 1 of the letter summarizes the authority's positions regarding those opinions 1 and 2?
Yes, it does. Options 1 and 2.
Excuse me, thank you, options 1 and 2. And is it your understanding that the second highlighted section on page 1 to 2 of this letter summarizes the authority's concerns regarding option 1? Thank you.
Yes, it does. And this notes that sensitivity or initial review that I discussed with Mr. Busher.
And can we please scroll farther down onto page 2? Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Ms. Bizzoni, is it your understanding that the third and fourth highlighted sections on page 2 of this letter summarize the authority's concerns regarding option 2?
Yes, they do.
And is it your understanding that the last highlighted section on page 3, I should mention, can we please scroll to page 3?
I apologize for interrupting. Ms. Chester, could you send this around to the service list?
Yes, this will be
it's
submitted as a
circulated?
sites exhibit.
Well, I'm just, right, we've got a 4-page letter in front of us about a bunch of questions that I asked her that I haven't seen before today. And I'm trying to follow along and read along to the highlighted and not highlighted sections, but I don't have a copy of this. So I would just ask that be sent now to the service list so we don't have to wait for it to be uploaded and then transferred over through the FTP process while I've got the witness here.
I'm happy to distribute it.
Thank you.
Regarding my last question, Ms. Bizzoni, is it your understanding that the last
Well,
highlight?
let's pause a moment because it sounds like Mr. Busher, you're asking for it to have this document in front of you in real time so you can follow along, right?
That would make my life easier, yes.
Yes, and that makes some sense to me. And I have so either I look to my team to forward this to the service list. That may be the easiest. We're working on it. The problem is you can't screen share and forward and send email at the same time. All right, it should be sent, and if you would let me know, Mr. Busher, when you have received it, and then we will pick up.
I have it, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Please go ahead, Ms. Chester.
I will repeat the question, Ms. Bizzoni. Is it your understanding that the last highlighted section on page 3 of this letter summarizes the authority's position regarding the policy misalignment between options 1 and 2 with certain state policy initiative related to the state's long-term water resilience?
Yes, that's true.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Chester. And then with that, I will turn first to Mr. Schutz. Do you have additional questions from Ms. Bizzoni based on that limited redirect? Mr. Schutz, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I'm still reviewing the document, and I need a few minutes to do that. I don't
Maybe
know.
what we, and that actually occurred to me too. Let's go ahead and, because that's fair, let's go ahead and take our lunch break. And I also need to take a look at this issue with Mr. King's, and I'm sorry, Ms. Bizzoni, you're on the next panel too, so you're here with us anyway. And I need to take a look at Mr. King's, that matter too, to see if we can resolve that. But I do want to keep us moving today. So let's go ahead. We'll take our lunch break. Let's reconvene at 12:40. And we will pick up with redirect and then move on to the next panel. And please do log out of the Zoom, and then you will have to log back in the afternoon.
Ms. Kenzie, if we're being asked to review this on top of getting ready for our next round of cross, could we respectfully at least have till 1 o'clock? You've just added more work for us.
I did not add more work.
Well, excuse me. You're absolutely correct. The sites team has added a little more work for all of us.
Well, let's keep this moving. All right.
And we have been moving quickly.
I'll give you till 1 in part because I need to look at Mr. King's that matter, and hopefully this will actually give me time to do that. All right, let's reconvene at 1 and we'll pick up then, and you will have to log back in. Thank you.
Thank you.